bedtime in your house, Melissa.
7:30, everyone, brush your teeth, get in bed. Mean Mommy's coming.
You
Talking
are
about
so
how to raise
impressive.
children. That's what we did in the commercial break.
David, which you did as well.
I have done it. I've been through it.
So any final words?
This is the busiest news day I've ever been here before. There's so much news going on. I love it.
We'll see you at
This
4
is why
p.m.
we
on
came
Fox
into this.
Business.
Yes, 4 p.m.
Fox
after the
Business.
bell. David and Melissa,
Thank
thanks
you,
to
thank
everybody.
you.
All right, that's it for us. We are back tomorrow at noon Eastern time, and here's Harris.
We begin with this Fox News alert. A big shift in the halls of power. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Reaction is now pouring in after House Speaker Paul Ryan says he will not seek re-election in November. There had been talk about it for weeks, some reporters even asking Ryan's staff about it. Still, it took many people in Washington by surprise. Ryan says his primary motivation is to spend more time with his wife and now teenage children after spending 2 decades in Congress.
What I realize is if I am here for one more term, my kids will only have ever known me as a weekend dad. I just can't let that happen.
The campaign arm of the House Democrats was taking no time, taking a shot at the announcement, saying, quote, Speaker Ryan sees what is coming in November and is calling it quits. For the many vulnerable House Republicans that Paul Ryan is abandoning, his historically unpopular and failed policies will hang over their re-elections like a dark cloud, end quote. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel joins us on Capitol Hill. Mike?
Well, Harris, good afternoon. President Trump paying tribute to Speaker Paul Ryan on Twitter, saying Speaker Paul Ryan is a truly good man, and while he will not be seeking re-election, he will leave a legacy of achievement that nobody can question. We are with you, Paul. Earlier, Ryan reflected on his time here in Congress.
It's been a wild ride, but it's been a journey well worth taking to be able to do my part to strengthening the American idea. That pursuit is never ending. Much work remains. But I like to think I have done my part, my little part in history to set us on a better course.
Now the focus shifts to the person who will ultimately replace Ryan. The 2 obvious contenders are Majority Whip Steve Scalise and Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy.
Paul Ryan's our speaker. He'll carry it out the rest of the way. The only focus I have is continuing to work to get everything that we still have left to get done, from Dodd-Frank reform to infrastructure to our rescission package as well. We've got a lot of work to do and focus on keeping the majority. Nothing about a speaker race.
We're working with President Trump, getting big things done. The tax cut bill's having a great impact on the economy. But there's a lot more work we need to get done. And we need to stay focused on doing that and keeping the House majority. Because if Nancy Pelosi's speaker next year, anybody who's dreaming of titles and gavels, all that's gone because Pelosi would be the speaker.
On the other side, Democratic leaders are praising Paul Ryan. For example, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer saying, quote, Speaker Ryan is a good man who is always true to his word, even though we disagreed on most issues. In the areas where we could work together, I always found him to be smart, thoughtful, and straightforward. It is not shocking that Ryan would want to change of pace after such a stressful job, but when the announcement comes, it is still a political earthquake in Congress. Harris?
Mike Emanuel, thank you very much. Let's bring in now a look at how this could affect the midterm elections. RNC spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany is here. Kayleigh, always great to see you. Before we get to the midterms, though, I just want to step back for just a second and ask you about the fundraising that this particular House Speaker has been doing lately. I looked at the Brain Room, and we've got numbers for the first quarter of this year north of $11 million. It speaks to his popularity in terms of fundraising.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. You know, Speaker Ryan's not only a prolific speaker, but a great fundraiser, and he engenders so much enthusiasm in our party, bringing together disparate factions to pass legislation. You look at what he's done, and, this hasn't been touted enough, but from January of last year to November of last year, he passed 337 bills. That's extraordinary. So much of it conservative legislation, like banning sanctuary cities, passing Kate's Law, passing Obamacare repeal and replace, passing pro-life legislation. That gives life to our party, and it gives life to our fundraising, and that we have to credit Speaker Ryan for.
Well, and, what he's saying is he's not resigning. He's going to stay through the end of his term, which I would imagine gives the party some time to push forward a new star.
That's right. And we have a deep bench, as Newt Gingrich said this morning. There's so many young, fresh faces in our party. Meanwhile, you look over to the Democratic Party, and it's very stale. You've got Nancy Pelosi talking about crumbs. She's the face of the party. You've got Chuck Schumer, and that's about it. But we have so much young blood, so many new and exciting people coming up through the ranks.
Yeah, and you know, Nancy Pelosi has also just brought in a whole lot of cash, a big overhaul for her party as well. So, you know, you've got your job cut out for you heading into November. So how much does this become a distraction or not with your House Speaker as you try to go forward and win in November?
It's not a distraction at all, because as you heard Steve Scalise say today, our priority is November. We can't even begin to think about a new speaker before we start thinking about the midterm elections. And there are some encouraging signs on the horizon. Chairwoman McDaniel and President Trump have brought in more times cash on hand advantage. So that's very exciting. But we have our work cut out for us. We know that history normally does not smile upon the sitting party that holds the presidency. So we have to defy history, as our chairwoman constantly says.
You know, in his remarks today, Speaker Ryan said that he didn't want this job. He didn't go after it. He was selected for it and actually took it. I don't want to say begrudgingly, but he didn't really seek it. So when you look at the job that he's done, can you talk with me a little bit, Kaylee, about what the House needs and the GOP will need going forward?
Well, what we need is someone who will, like Speaker Ryan, push through President Trump's agenda. That is what is so important. You know, Speaker Ryan was able to railroad the president's priorities through the House at really what was a record pace. He was a loyal foot soldier to the president, and as President Trump said, he has a legacy of achievement to show for it. So we need someone in his making, and who that will be, the House will decide, but someone that's going to be an ally to this president, because this president is the person that the people empowered to lead.
You know, it's interesting because in the beginning, Paul Ryan wasn't seen as that. He was viewed as more of the establishment versus this president. He got on board, and tax cuts were something that they really got together. Going, though, into the future, the president has said he wants more Republicans who are like him. And that means that could the House look decidedly different? Could parts of the party look very different than what they do under a Paul Ryan leadership?
Well, it might look different, but ultimately we know the House is the most reflective body of the people, and the people support this president. And we saw, as you mentioned, Paul Ryan and President Trump at first, you know, during the campaign, were perhaps had different ideas on issues. But the point is they came together, and that was because of the leadership of President Trump and Paul Ryan together. They came together because what makes this party our party are those conservative values that bind us, like you mentioned, tax cuts, lowering the hardship on the American people, deregulating. These principles bind us as a party, and these two individuals came together.
You know, I'm looking at something that I read this morning by the Daily Cost today. It's data that's compiled on Republicans giving up House seats at a rate not seen in decades. And by giving it up, as I read through the article, they're not losing, they're just deciding to step away. What do you say about that?
Yeah, we look at these wave of retirements, and if you really look at them at a granular level and break them up, you see that a lot of the retiring chairmen on some of the committees had approached their tenure, their term limits there, so they're not running for re-election for that purpose. Many of the individuals retiring are above the average time that you serve in Congress, so they've served for decades and decades. But we're excited. You know, it's a new challenge when you are finding a new Republican congressman in that district to rise up through the ranks. We need young blood, and it's exciting to see a turnover. We're not looking at that as a negative sign at all.
All right. Kaylee McEnany, thank you so very much, spokesperson for the RNC, handling this developing news today. Thank you. And now for more reaction from one of Speaker Ryan's colleagues in the House, Republican Congressman Leonard Lance of New Jersey is with me now. First of all, tell me how surprised you were to hear about this news.
I was very surprised. I, of course, wish Paul and Jana the best. I predict a bright future for Paul, and obviously he's very concerned about raising his children with his wife in Janesville, Wisconsin.
You know, I was just speaking with the RNC spokesperson about this issue, and I want to bring it up with you. There have been in corners of the Republican Party, the brain trust is retiring. Now, she was talking about term limits and other things. Whatever the reasons, people like you who are the most experienced on the Hill now, what are your views about who should step up and be the next House Speaker?
I think, Harris, it's entirely premature to discuss who would be the next speaker. There, I'm sure, will be candidates, but Paul has indicated he will continue in his responsibilities until the end of this year, and I want to make sure that we move forward this year before a discussion is who the next leader will be for next year.
Well, they're already talking about it in the House because we heard from Steve Scalise, who says he's been interested in moving up. And there might be others that also express it in the days, weeks, and months to come ahead of Paul Ryan's departure. I'm just curious what types of things that you think you need politically and in a new speaker, because Paul Ryan didn't start yoked to the president. He may have gotten there on tax cuts, but that's not how it began.
I think we need a person who can bring the entire conference together, a unifier, someone who recognizes that we are a great nation moving forward. And we have quite a few leaders in that regard, Steve Scalise, Kevin McCarthy, and perhaps others as well, Harris.
All right. What, moving into the midterm elections, what type of support would you like to see the speaker give? I mean, he's raising a lot of money for the party.
Yes, I think Paul has done an excellent job in that regard, and we want to be as competitive as possible. And I think that this is an indication that we have an excellent chance of retaining our majority. We recognize that at the midterm we have to be careful in that regard, and certainly I think he will be committed to making sure that that is the case.
When you say you have to be careful, what do you mean? What's the headwind that you're facing?
Usually at midterm elections, the party controlling the presidency doesn't have as many seats reelected, but I am confident that we will retain our majority, Harris.
And deploying the president in political fashion to help out candidates, what's your view on that?
I have always run my own races. I am sure that the president will campaign, particularly in the Middle West and the South. But let me say that I want to work with Speaker Ryan and with our House leadership to make sure, Harris, that we continue to be in the majority, because I think the alternative would not be in the best interest of the American nation. I don't believe that the views that were in vogue when President Obama was first president, when the Democrats controlled both houses, I don't think that those are really the views that reflect how we should move forward as a country.
Well, I got to tell you, in terms of what this House Speaker has done financially for this party with these new numbers in, the National Republican Congressional Committee just had a transfer from the Speaker's till of $40 million, something that he had hoped to raise from last spring in a year. He did it in just 7 months. So this is something that I would imagine that the party is glad that he is staying through the end of his term on. I want to give you the last word.
Yes, I'm certainly pleased that he will remain as Speaker, and I wish him well. He is a person of sterling integrity, and I think that he has done great service for the American nation.
All right. Congressman Lance, thank you very much. The great state of New Jersey, good to see you today.
Thank you, Harris.
And Speaker Ryan will sit down with our very own Dana Perino. This will be his first one-on-one interview since making that announcement that he will not seek re-election. Watch for it, 2 p.m. Eastern on the Daily Briefing right here on Fox News Channel, FNC for the cool kids. President Trump is taunting Russia as he weighs how to respond to a suspected chemical attack in Syria. This as he's about to meet with Defense Secretary Mattis at the White House at 2 p.m. What might he do in response to what's happened? Fox News alert, and at parts it got heated again on Capitol Hill. Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg facing a second round of questioning today from lawmakers on the Hill. The social media mogul has been under intense scrutiny, as you know, following a massive data mining scandal, which compromised the personal information of 87 million users, although he said, well, he's not sure exactly how many. And he admitted his company could have done more about it.
It's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
Peter Ducey live on Capitol Hill with the latest for us. Peter.
Harris, we just found out a little while ago that Mark Zuckerberg is one of the 87 million Facebook users who had their personal information scooped up and then sold to somebody who wasn't supposed to have it.
Was your data included in the data sold to the malicious third parties? Your personal data?
Yes.
And that means that all the lawmakers concerned about privacy today are talking to somebody who had his privacy violated. But that doesn't mean that they were satisfied with his answers about proactive steps the social media company has been taking to better guard user data. And the harshest questions so far have been coming from the left side of the dais.
Why should we trust you to follow through on these promises when you have demonstrated repeatedly that you're willing to flout both your own internal policies and government oversight when the need suits you?
Congressman, respectfully, I disagree with that characterization.
And that's about as heated as Mark Zuckerberg gets. Meanwhile, House lawmakers also seemed unimpressed with the artificial intelligence capabilities that Facebook says they are going to deploy to root out bad behavior because they are concerned it's scooping up and censoring political speech that liberals who work at Facebook may not like, including that from the pro-Trump Facebook stars Diamond and Silk.
There are types of content like terrorism that I think that we all agree we do not want to have on our service. So we build systems that can identify those and can remove that content, and we're very proud of that work.
Let me tell you something right now. Diamond and Silk is not terrorism.
The commotion outside of the Energy and Commerce Committee hearing room where this is happening is about as much as you see for anything here on Capitol Hill. And they have so much ground to cover, Harris, that they're not taking a break. They're going right through votes. People can get up and vote and come back. But Zuckerberg is stuck in the chair for a while.
And we saw yesterday they offered Zuckerberg a few times to take a break. He finally took, I think, like a 5-minute one hours later. I would imagine there's so many things to get to. They all would like to leave before 8 o'clock tonight. Peter Doocy, thank you very much. Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, you just saw her right there inside the hearing. She's actually stepped out that ongoing hearing outside of it with Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill to talk with us about how it's going. So first of all, great to see you. And I want to start where things got a little contentious there. Talk to me about that moment when Mark Zuckerberg was basically asked, you have certain people you don't really like on Facebook, apparently, because you push out conservative voices, so on and so forth. Diamond and Silk came up, and you said...
Yes, I said that they are not terrorism. Here is the thing, Harris. I have chaired as the chairman of communications and technology. I've already done one hearing on algorithms, getting ready to do a second one. And next week, I'm going to do a hearing on prioritization. And we're looking at how social media manipulates what they push forward, what they prioritize, and what they censor. So I asked Mark Zuckerberg if he subjectively manipulated these algorithms to yield a certain result or a certain outcome. And he began to say, well, that they didn't, except for things like terrorism. And I pointed out, Diamond and Silk are not terrorism. Now, many of us have been censored at different times for different reasons by social media, Facebook, YouTube, and this is why I contend that this is the first of many hearings as we look at the need for privacy regulations because of the violations to privacy and speech by the social media. And Harris, you have financial services, banking, credit bureaus, people that manage benefits, your broker, that all have extensive privacy regulations that protect you, the consumer. That is your toolbox for protecting your virtual you online. The only segment of the industry that has zero regulation, zero federal statutes is social media, and that is why we have to have one regulator, one set of rules for the internet ecosystem. And I pushed forward the Browser Act, which is bipartisan. I've had that bill for well over a year, and it is time for us to pass that and get it to the president's desk.
You know, some of the observation about these hearings is that the questions from the left side of the political aisle have been more toward regulation than the right side of the political aisle. What do you say about that?
What we want is not a panoply of regulators. We want one federal statute. The Browser Act is simply 13 pages. It allows consumers to opt in and decide for themselves what they would like shared as within their data. And it gives them ownership of their data. The question to ask is, who owns the virtual you? And Mr. Zuckerberg said today, if you post a picture, he said this in response to Ms. Matsui, then they, Facebook, own that.
Wow.
Well, I would venture and would offer to him, no, you don't. That belongs to the individual who is utilizing your service, and they reserve to themselves in the virtual space, exactly as they do in the physical space, how that is going to be used, and it ought not to be used without their consent.
You know, that is so fascinating, because that speaks to the very divide where we have stood with this. Mark Zuckerberg sees it one way, that it belongs to Facebook, according to what he said, that you say he said in the hearing. And then the rest of everybody else, those of us who really understand you don't have much, if all, any privacy online, but you do expect what you post to be something that belongs to you, to make decisions about that. That is the dividing line. That is the disconnect. So if the Browser Act is passed, those 13 pages, and you get what's called an opt-in or an opt-out, how do you keep Facebook and others honest?
You do it through the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC has been our nation's privacy regulator now for decades. And for the past 20 years, they have regulated the virtual space. They're the ones that issued the consent decree on Facebook and brought them in compliance in 2011. And after that is when we started the Privacy Working Group, which I chaired. And for 4 years, we've been trying to pass data security and privacy legislation. See, Harris, you need that federal statute so that the regulator, in this case the FTC, can say, all right, Google or Yahoo or YouTube or Facebook or whomever, you're outside of the allowance given to you by federal statute. Therefore, we're going to conduct an investigation and issue to you criminal or violations or penalties, however we move forward with that component of it. But yes, we need data security, which is breach notification.
Okay.
And we also need privacy, which reserves to the individual the right to protect themselves online.
Boy, it's interesting. I've been watching a couple of days of this. I'm really curious to see how much buy-in these companies are going to have on being regulated, even in that way. But you're getting to the bottom of some things. And the Browser Act, authored by Congresswoman Blackburn, we're learning about today. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
The White House says President Trump says he believes he has the authority to fire Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Amid reports he's considering doing just that. But will that happen, and what would the effect be? Judge Andrew Napolitano is stepping up to weigh in. And the president's blistering new warning after Russia vowed to shoot down any U.S. missiles in Syria in response to a suspected chemical attack. So what is next as this escalates? Stay close. Trump is set to meet with Defense Secretary James Mattis moments from now. He's warning Russia the U.S. will strike Syria after Sunday's suspected chemical attack outside Damascus. The president tweeted, Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin live now at the Pentagon with the latest on this. Jennifer?
Harris, Mattis is heading over to the White House in less than 30 minutes to meet with the president in the Oval Office. Moments ago, he spoke from the Pentagon, but was non-committal when asked about the alleged Syrian chemical attack.
Have you seen enough evidence that to blame the Assad regime for this most recent chemical attack? Have you seen evidence confident to make that assumption?
We're still assessing the intelligence ourselves and our allies. We're still working on this.
Is the U.S. military ready right now to conduct a retaliatory strike if ordered?
We stand ready to provide military options if they're appropriate, as the president determined.
He was also asked whether whether the U.S. was in position to strike Syria. He then thanked the pool reporter, and that pool reporter left the room. The U.S. already had a guided missile destroyer in position off the coast of Syria. The USS Donald Cook has roughly 75 Tomahawk missiles on board and 20 surface-to-air missiles in the event that Russian warplanes attempt to challenge it. Then there's the French frigate known as the Aquitaine, already in position with about 16 cruise missiles on board. One of the first phone calls President Trump made after indications of a chemical weapon attack emerged was to French President Emmanuel Macron. New satellite images obtained by Fox from ImageSat International appear to show that Russia's 11 warships seen in the vicinity of its naval base in Tartus, Syria, have put out to sea within recent hours. European airspace authorities issued a rapid alert notification to aircraft flying near Syria in the coming days, quote, due to the possible launch of airstrikes into Syria with air-to-ground and/or cruise missiles within the next 72 hours and the possibility of intermittent disruption of radio navigation equipment, due consideration needs to be taken. The U.S. and France are likely to be joined by British warships in the region, but Prime Minister Theresa May, Harris, has to decide whether to participate before Parliament resumes on Monday. Russia has threatened to engage any warships that fire on Syria. A high-level delegation of Russian lawmakers arrived in Damascus today to meet with Syrian President Bashar Assad. Harris?
It's interesting what you said, Jennifer, because we do know that the president talked with the British Prime Minister yesterday. We had that in our meeting notes for him. And so you say she's got to make a decision before Parliament. That puts more emphasis now on the phone call that we know happened between President Trump and Theresa May. Jennifer.
Well, remember, Harris, a year ago when the U.S. did strike with 59 Tomahawks, the British Prime Minister put it to a vote in Parliament, and Parliament voted no. So it's a risky position for Theresa May right now.
Good point. Jennifer, thank you very much. Republican Senator Cory Gardner, who serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is right there on the left of your screen. Great to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, my first question would be, are we actually seeing things escalate with Russia?
I think Assad has once again displayed the dark edge of humanity. He's aided and abetted in this course of action, these atrocities by Russia, a country that has made a partner of Assad. And certainly we're seeing an escalation of violence, conflict, using chemical agents against children is unacceptable. And that's why you see this coalition coming together.
Senator Gardner, I can't imagine you're not talking about this on the Foreign Relations Committee. What type of comfort, what type of zone are we with escalating things with Russia? There will reach a point where we will do what?
Well, look, I think one of the things that we ought to do with Russia right now is we have to consider whether or not Russia should be named, identified as a state sponsor of terror. What we have seen by Russia, the poisoning of people in European soil, a major European nation in England, using chemical agents against a person in England. What they have done in Syria to aid and abet Assad. Look, we renamed North Korea a state sponsor of terror as a result of the death of Kim Jong-nam. What is the difference between what Russia has now shown with the attack in England, as well as what they are doing in Syria, propping up a regime that would kill its own people through the use of chemical agents, something that's outlawed by any number of international obligations and laws.
And of course, you're talking about that ex-British spy who was poisoned, he and his daughter, inside the UK. You know, Ambassador Haley this week has said that Russia has the blood of children in Syria on their hands. What do you say about that?
Well, they certainly do. Look, this is a heinous act, and the last time this happened, the United States responded proportionately and appropriately. We have to do the same thing with a global coalition. You mentioned France and Britain that are at least talking about being a part of this. We've seen assets, at least according to open source reports, apparently moving around in Syria out of the area. We know that there are air assets in the area, according to, again, open source reports that are covering the area from an intelligence perspective. So this is a very serious conflict that Russia has decided to make themselves implicit in the carry out of this chemical attack.
Senator Gardner, has our mission changed in Syria? And I know the president tweeted about humanity. He's talked about humanitarian crisis that's going on there with people in harm's way, chemical weapons suspected. But we went there to root out ISIS, and we basically have done that. 97% is the attack rate there, and clearing them out of the caliphate and the real estate there. Is the mission changing?
ISIS continues to be a threat in Syria and the Middle East, so that mission will remain. But I think this president administration needs to come forward with three things. Number one, it's clear that there is no future for Assad in Syria. We need to have a coalition response to what happens with Assad once he leaves. He cannot be left there. Two, we have to continue the fight against terrorism in Syria, throughout the Middle East, Islamic State and other groups that wish to do this harm. Three, we've got to figure out how to safeguard and preserve lives of the innocent Syrian people who now witness once again this atrocity of a gas attack, a chemical attack against own people and children. We've all seen the pictures. It's unacceptable. And I hope the world will have courage to stand up and say enough is enough. Let's solve this once and for all.
Yeah, north of 400,000 people, some say north of 500,000 people have died in the civil war. We step into it now, and I'm just curious what that's going to look like. Your last word.
We have to have a coalition of like-minded nations in the Middle East and around the globe who are part of this solution.
Do we
can't
have
be
that?
It alone.
I mean, Qatar's Emir was just here with the president. We've got an air base there, 10,000 American troops. Can we count on Saudi Arabia to help?
I'll be meeting with the Qataris later on this afternoon, continuing to have conversations with Saudi Arabia. France, Britain, others have to be a part of this. This is something that we need to have a global response to, because a Russia, Iran, Assad sort of trilateral regime willing to use a chemical attack on its own people, that's a regime that cannot stay.
You're mentioning some people who were at a meeting over last weekend, Iran, Russia, and also Turkey. A lot of work to be done to figure out who's going to be on our side and who's not. Senator Gardner, the great state of Colorado, thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Special Counsel Robert Mueller are both reportedly in the hot seat now as the president is growing more and more frustrated with the widening scope of the Russia investigation. Will the president decide to fire one of these men? Judge Andrew Napolitano weighs in on the potential. The president is reportedly considering firing Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. After it was revealed, Rosenstein signed off on an FBI raid targeting the president's longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen. The New York Times is reporting President Trump considered firing special counsel Robert Mueller back in December over reports that he had issued a new round of subpoenas related to his business dealings. Here's White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders yesterday.
Do you believe he has the power to fire special counsel Robert Mueller? Does he believe that's within his power?
Certainly believes he has the power to do so.
Our Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, joins me now. We can get to the power to fire in just a second. I want to talk with you about where we are with the people potentially on the chopping block, and that is the Deputy AG, Rosenstein, and potentially Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General.
Well, the president can fire the attorney general or the deputy attorney general for any reason or no reason. He can just say, you know, you've run your turn. I don't want to work with you anymore. I don't like you. I don't like the way you're doing your work.
Why do you think he hasn't done it yet? Because, I mean, he's not happy that Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation.
I don't know the reason for that. The president is entitled to an attorney general that he can confide in and be close to. It is a unique relationship. They do talk to each other. They're supposed to. The attorney general needs guidance from the president as to where law enforcement resources should be put. But the attorney general has independent obligations imposed upon him by law and by legal ethics, which transcend the president's wishes. However, we had a very, very close relationship where the president and the attorney general were brothers. That was about the best combination we've had in the past 50 years.
Sure, the Kennedys.
Right.
All right, talk with me then about the process by which the president could do this, because you heard Sarah Sanders say, well, he's got the right to do this, but there is a process that has to happen.
Okay, I was surprised to hear what Sarah Sanders said. Because,
why?
Well, right after the clip that you ran, she said, we've been advised we can. Translate? They asked for a legal opinion from the Justice Department and from outside lawyers. We now know this about whether or not the president can fire Bob Mueller. And they got arguments on both sides, but the arguments came down on the side of, yes, he can do so. Now, it's unsettled law, meaning there's good law saying he can't, and there's good law saying he can. In my opinion, he ought not do so, because that will start a cascade of events that will exceed his ability to control.
But firing Robert Mueller is different than firing your AG and deputy AG, correct? I mean,
is the purpose of the firing to impede the investigation of him? That could
But you said that he could fire those two men for any reason. We don't even have to know the reason.
Well, I'm talking about the firing of Mueller.
Well, that's different.
he can fire the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General, both of whom he appointed, each of whom has been confirmed by the Senate for any reason or no reason. He will not get somebody confirmed in either of those positions, in my opinion, until after the midterm elections. So you'll have caretakers running the Justice Department.
Yeah, and then you potentially have a lot more drama going on.
Where do the caretakers come from? The next rank in the Justice Department, who are professional prosecutors. They're not necessarily political types aligned to the president. So he might have less of a line of communication after the firings than he has now.
All right. Real quickly, if he does step to anything like that, you say that Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley are a problem. Why?
Because they are an integral part of the president's coalition in the Senate. They are leaders of the moderate to conservative wing of the Republican Party, and they both said if he fires Mueller, it's the beginning of the end of his presidency, by which they must mean that steps would be taken to curtail his powers.
All right, I'm going to ask you to sit still and just watch, because we've got Senator Rand Paul coming up, and I want you to know about what's about to happen.
Okay.
There's stunning new information about the FBI officials caught sending anti-Trump text messages during the 2016 campaign. What the department told Senator Rand Paul about their security clearances and how long those were in place. The senator next. Stay put.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. We've got a big show. I'll talk to House Speaker Paul Ryan in his first interview since announcing his decision to not run for re-election. Plus, Defense Secretary Mattis is heading to the White House right now to continue talks with President Trump on a response to Syria's suspected chemical weapons attack. We have the new details. And I just sat down with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who talked about what this administration could do with Syria. Join me on the Daily Briefing at the top of the hour.
This is breaking news. New information about the FBI officials caught sending anti-Trump text messages during the 2016 presidential campaign. Senator Rand Paul asked that agency whether Peter Strzok and Lisa Page still currently have security clearances despite being, well, reassigned. He got a letter, and now he knows the answers. He's sharing it with us on Overtime today. Senator Paul, obviously a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. You got this letter. What does it say?
Well, it's interesting. You know, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page are enemies of President Trump. They were spending time at work trying to figure out how to keep him from being president, and if he were president, trying to have some sort of insurance policy to, I guess, prevent him from acting as president. And so we asked the question of the FBI director, do they still have top secret clearance? Can they search databases unrestricted without a warrant? And the answer we got was sort of a non-answer, but it's an interesting non-answer because they said all FBI agents have top secret clearance and must keep that. So if they're still FBI agents, which apparently they are, he means the non-answer specifically really is an answer. And it says that they can search our databases. And our point is a broader one here. We're concerned whether you don't like Trump or you don't like the Democrats. If you work for the FBI, you should have the oversight of a judge, so you can't willy-nilly search, you know, an enemies list that you might have at work.
Senator, I want to step in and unpack this a little bit because this is important. We've been waiting to see, and I know you put in your request back in January to be able to see if Peter Strzok and Lisa Page still have security clearances. What kind of clearance do they have, and what would that mean for today?
Well, specifically, the way they answered us is they said, we will not answer you about specific agents, but we will say that all FBI agents have top secret clearance.
What does that mean?
My understanding is that means that they have access to all the databases that the FBI has access to. And this is an enormous amount of information. There's the FISA database called 702 database. There's the 12333 database, which is another secret database. But then there's just immense databases. And the question is, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page hate the president so much. Can they be typing up his lawyer's name? Can they be typing up my name? Could they be typing up Republican donors' names to the president and searching at their desk ways to try to bring them down? They need to be fired. At the very least, they need to be suspended from any privileges to look at these databases until it's determined whether or not they can still remain at the FBI. But this is why we want, in general, we want everyone at the FBI, good or bad, potentially good or bad, we want everyone to have to ask a judge. This is what our founding fathers wanted. They separated the police power from the judicial power so we would have checks and balances.
That's the umbrella look at this real quickly, though. Who can they search? Could they search the president? I mean, I just want to get to the nitty-gritty. What does it mean that two people who've been reassigned for having potential bias against a sitting president now still have the type of access that they can search almost anybody? Is he on that list?
I know of no limits to who they can search. Any American can have their name typed into there, and they do not require a judicial warrant. And this is a big fight. We had this fight in the Senate 2 months ago.
Sure.
This is why I was so disappointed, because those of us who want to reform the system want to say that FBI agents should have to go to a judge to get a warrant to look up an American's information. They came back and said, oh, if there's an open FBI investigation, you have to get a warrant. Well, that's actually the least of our concern. We want to know when there's no investigation, when someone just trolling through Republican donors down at FBI headquarters, we want to know they can't do that. And specifically, we asked them, can Peter Strzok and Lisa Page do it? And they said all FBI agents have top secret clearance. They wouldn't answer specifically whether Peter Strzok and Lisa Page have it, but if all agents have top secret clearance and they are still agents, then there is a syllogism there that sort of indicates that they still have that power.
This is very interesting, and there's one other thing I want to talk to you about before we move on here, and it's also breaking news today. You potentially could stand in the way for Mike Pompeo's confirmation hearing. It's tomorrow, and you've threatened to filibuster that. Why?
My concern is that President Trump's been very, very clear about his vision of the world. His vision of the world includes the idea and the understanding that the Iraq War was a mistake. Does Pompeo believe that? If he doesn't believe that, I don't know how he can serve the president well. The president's also said it's time to come home from Afghanistan. Does Pompeo believe that? If he doesn't believe in what the president believes in, I think it would be a disservice to the president to have him in that position. So I think we need to explore, and this is the advice and consent that the Constitution gives to the Senate. We need to explore whether or not Pompeo is faithful to the president's vision, or whether he will be like a lot of the rest of the establishment in Washington and obstruct what the president wants to do.
He had both sides of the political aisle supporting him in his current position. We'll see how it checks out. Big news that you brought us today, Senator Rand Paul from the Hill. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
Thank you.